I'd like to thank Francis, actually, for a fantastic setup here to the talk, because he brought up a number of themes that I'm going to be building upon. And one of those themes is this sort of caution, optimism yet caution, because there are a lot of things that we should be approaching with hope that we're going to be able to have technology to be able to do things, but also this notion of caution. We darn well better actually get it right. And also, by the way, anything that Dr. Amen is saying in terms of the neuroimaging, please don't let it into the courts. Let me just kind of put that out there. I won't get to any of that stuff because I'll be sticking on memory. And in terms of making the kind of deep dive back, he brought up a quote from 1933. I'm going to one-up him, exactly one-up him, with a quote from Frederick Bartlett, which is my take-home on a number of different levels, both in terms of telling us how memory works, but also how long we've known that it works this way, because I'm going to try to show you some of the experimental cognitive psychology that has backed this up for many, many years, for decades. Also, though, try to hit some of the neuroscience to say, you know what, those cognitive psychologists, yeah, they got it dead right. And all of this is in the service of trying to get a different view on memory than the intuitive one that you may or may not have, but I know that most of your jurors actually have. So, here's the quote. He said, "Memory is not the re-excitation of innumerable fixed, lifeless ideas and fragmentary traces." Now, we don't write like this anymore, so let's try to unpack it. He says, memory isn't re-exciting, just sort of reactivating, going, oh, wait a minute, let me get it back, bing, I've got it. This huge number of fixed and lifeless ideas. Things that sort of got etched into your brain and stayed there without changing in some fixed and permanent stasis. No, that's not what memory is. Instead, what is it? He says it's an imaginative reconstruction or construction. So you're making it up. Memory is making it up based out of what are the relation of our attitudes toward a whole active mass of organized past reactions or experiences. So your prior experiences, your expectations, your beliefs, your biases, this is where implicit bias comes in. This is what memory is made out of. It's made out of a whole bunch of that and to a little outstanding detail which commonly appears in image or language form. So he kind of turns it on its head. Most of us may think that, yeah, we fill in a couple little things here and there, but most of it is from that original event. It happened, it got etched into our brain, we reactivate that, and we kind of fill in just one or two little blanks along the way. He says, no. What you're doing is you're telling a story, you're filling it all in, and by the way, you got a couple little bits and pieces from there that you use as dots to then connect. And I'm here to tell you that, yeah, that's actually how memory works. He got it right in 1932 here, and the neuroscience of it backs it up and everything as well. So it's kind of high time that we now in the court say, that's been long enough. Let's try to actually get this in here. Now, I have a couple of demos I always do in audiences like this. I really like this one because I think it quickly actually makes my point. I just want you to watch this video.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Sorry, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
So anyone notice the 21 changes in the video here? Let's watch it again.
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Well, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
We can take a number of things from this video. They say it's easy to miss what you're not looking for. Watch out for cyclists. Yeah, that's one nice message. Another thing you can think about is attention. You're only attending to some number of things in here, but I like to take a memory take on this and to say that this is clearly demonstrating that your memory isn't actually accurately recording all of the things that are happening to you. I mean, some of you may have noticed one or two little changes and felt pretty darn good about yourself. Nobody in this room noticed all 21 changes. I don't even know what all 21 changes are, and I've given this demo 21 times. So, yeah, the body changes, the bear changes to a suit of armor, what he's wearing changes. So when we ask people, so was it a blue or a black blazer that he had on? But the thing is, people will confidently say that they know some of these details. They don't. They're filling it in. They're making it up. But they don't know that they're actually doing it. If memory really worked like a video recorder, accurately recording what was going on and storing away all of these details, as the camera pans across the first time, you'd go, oh, look, there's a big bear, and you would get these sort of things in your memory. So when it panned across again, you would say, wait a minute, that's not a bear anymore, it's a suit of armor. But it's still consistent with the gist. Oh yeah, it's some murder mystery kind of thing in England maybe a while ago, and so a suit of armor or whatever back there is perfectly fine. If it were a dancing green iguana that it changed into, then you would have noticed this because it's no longer consistent with that kind of thing. You stored the gist. Your memory has a limited capacity. You stored a few little tiny details. Oh, it was her. Maybe she was planting petunias in the potting shed. Maybe you got that. And the rest you just stored as the gist. And that fundamentally is how memory works. And if that happens in all of you right here, right now, what do you think is going on with the eyewitnesses who witnessed some crime? More to the point, though, what's happening to all the jurors who are listening to perhaps weeks' worth of testimony? You really think they're getting all of the details? No. They're basing everything that they're doing on this notion of a gist and a few little details. So to me, though, this highlights a problem. Yes, it highlights one problem. Memory isn't perfect. Yeah. And a lot of you are saying, yeah, we've known this. We all know this. We have arguments with our spouses over our memories not being perfect. Sure. But that's not really where the problem is. The problem, though, is that there's this large gap between how I think memory works, knowing all of this stuff, and when you ask people, how does memory work? Does memory, for example, act like a video recorder, accurately recording the events that we see and hear so we can review and inspect them later? So this kind of experiment has been done several times, and they always come up with the same basic results here. So for example, this is saying, okay, you either strongly agree or mostly agree. About 65% of the general public, to some extent, agrees with this statement. And the rest are saying, well, either mostly disagree or strongly disagree, and even though they don't have PhDs in the topic, almost nobody says, I don't know. All right, you ask memory researchers this same question. The only thing we disagree on is how vehemently we disagree with this statement, with still a good 90-some-odd% of us strongly disagreeing with this statement. Not a one of us goes with it. That's the big gap. And that, though, is that you have people who are trying to base decisions on evidence that they are giving too much credence to. I was approached by a judge after one of these talks that I'd given who said that she had just presided over a case in which 2 women were assaulted, sexually assaulted. They recovered DNA. The DNA was the same. The 2 victims picked the same dude out of the lineup. Sounds like a pretty darn good case so far, except the DNA didn't actually match the dude that they picked out of the lineup. You know what? Jury found him guilty anyway. Wow. That's the issue here. Okay. It doesn't matter, by the way in which we ask this question or the specifics of the question. This is a big, huge, busy slide. There's one thing I want to try to actually have you get from this. Here's what the experts think. Here's what jurors think. Here's what y'all think in terms of judges and law enforcement and this sort of thing. You can see some number of questions in which there's a decent agreement between the experts and the judges. A little worse here. You see a lot of them, though, in which the jurors, all of these, the jurors are not lining up with the memory experts. And they're, of course, the ones who are making the decision here. And there are plenty of cases. This has to do with repression or this video recorder thing or hypnosis or what have you. There are huge gaps that we have here. So why is it that people like me think that it can actually be so bad? Okay, well, I'm going to more than one-up myself here. I'm going to go to Hermann Ebbinghaus. 1885 is how long we've known some of these things for. He did the very first empirical studies on memory, and he's always cited as the first empirical memory researcher. This is one of the many things that he came up with, and it makes a very nice point for our case today. What he did is he taught himself a series of nonsense letter strings. He would get to he's 100% on it, and then he would see what affected the accuracy of his memory. In this case, he just looked at time. Like, okay, I'm at 100%, and now I'm going to test myself 20 minutes later. How do I do? I'm going to test myself an hour after that instead. How do I do? How do I do? At 2 days, at about a week, and about a month. This curve has been replicated about 1 trillion times now in all sorts of different ways. But it shows a couple things. First off, he's at 100% immediately. After 1 hour, he's below 50% on his memory, meaning that half of the information he knew is gone in the first hour. How often do you get to the eyewitness within the first hour? Pretty darn rarely. When somebody's standing up on the, in court there giving testimony and they're recounting what happened, that's obviously not within an hour. Look at this. This is a month here, and a good three-quarters of the information is gone. So if you are remembering something from that event, it's probably not that initial sort of laying down of the memory. It's the fact that you've thought about it and restored it, thought about it and restored it, and kept this alive. But each time you think about it, if any distortion comes in, you're now ingraining that distortion. And it gives one mechanism by which the memories can diverge and get very, very odd and incorrect. So that's one thing to get from it, is this very, very steep learning curve, showing that, in fact, a huge amount of information is lost right off. And the second thing, as I say, is that very, very little remains over a time. Oops. Now, normally when I give these talks, if I have a little bit more time, I do this as a live demo in the audience, and you're just going to have to take my word for it. It works every single time. And here's the way this works. I start my talk off, I give people a list of words. It has it has a good 3 columns worth of words on here. There are 30 words, or actually, sorry, 45 words. And I say it's a typical laboratory memory test, and whether I do it to undergraduates or to federal judges doesn't matter. The data always comes out the same way. About 5-10 minutes or so into the talk, I say just take a minute, remember as many words as you can. I have people write them down, and I do audience participation. And I say, okay, look, maybe you studied bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, and they're mixed in with other words. You may notice a theme to these words. In fact, this is everything but the word sleep. Sleep should be on this list. And sure enough, I go through and I say, how many people remember wake? And maybe 5% of the hands go up. How many people remember sleep? 3/4 of the hands go up every single time. Be thankful I'm not humiliating you here, because it would happen to you. Trust me. It happened to me even though I knew the effect when somebody did it on me. So in any case, when researchers look at this, we see things like, okay, did you remember dream? And maybe they're going to get a decent percentage of it. This is in young individuals. But if we say, did you remember sleep? Sure enough, people remember the word sleep. Whether I do it in a live demo or whether it's in a controlled psychology experiment, we do this all the time. Because it's the word that should be on the list. It's the highest associate of all of these other words. It should be on the list. And the issue, though, is the fact that you freely recall it proves that Bartlett was right, that memory is a reconstruction. You don't end up saying, oh, Zymergy, I remember that. No. By the way, it's the art and science of brewing beer, so at least you maybe get one other thing from my talk today. Zymergy. In any case, you remember sleep because it should be on the list, so you fill that in. In fact, if I ask for your confidence on it, those are the ones you are absolutely the most confident on. As we get older, we remember them even immediately, more frequently than you remember the actual studied list. And certainly by the time, even in young college students, by the time you've waited 2 days, you remember these lure items more than you remember the target items. So, but okay, this is how your memory is working. It's filling in these things. So if you witness some event, you see somebody running out of a liquor store, gun in one hand, wad of cash in the other. Hey, what'd you see? Well, this young guy came flying out of a liquor store. How do you know it was a young guy? You know it was a young guy because that's what your memory is telling you it should be. Little old ladies rarely rob liquor stores with guns and run dashing down the street. But okay, Now maybe instead of also just young and guy, maybe you toss an ethnicity on here, I don't know, but it's your prior beliefs, biases, expectations, just as Bartlett was saying, that is causing you to fill this in, and you have no idea you're doing that filling in. All right. But what I've been showing you so far, I mean, they're word lists, they're little video clips, they're anecdotes. Let's try to get it a little bit closer to home here. Talk about the work of Elizabeth Loftus, one of my colleagues at UCI. Absolute pioneer in the field. In some of her early work here, she showed people a video clip of a car driving along a country road, and right afterwards asked one of two questions. Some people got how fast was the white car going while on the country road, and other people got how fast was the white car going when it passed the barn while on the country road. So just slide in a little reference to a barn, just like, okay, so after he threatened her, then what? After he grabbed the gun, then what? Okay, well, they hadn't seen anything about a barn because there was no barn in this video. Maybe the witnesses hadn't mentioned anything about a weapon or a threat or whatever yet, but now you have a leading question. Bring people back a couple days later and ask them what they saw. Well, okay, in this case here, where nobody ever mentions it, still 3% of the people mentioned that there was a barn on the country road. I mean, come on, it's a country road. Of course there's a barn. But again, this is even starting to get to Bartlett's point here. But certainly if you make any just passing reference to it here, now almost 6 times as many people, 17% of the people report seeing a barn. Never did. You just mentioned it in a leading question. It is now a part of their memory and they're confident. Witness a scene of a traffic accident. How fast was the black car going when it hit the blue car versus how fast was the black car going when it smashed into the blue car? You saw the same thing. I'm just changing the way I'm asking the question. Hit versus smashed, and I've now elevated this by 7 miles an hour. Oh, maybe it's a school zone now. Oh, yeah, okay, this matters. So you would think it's your memory, you saw it, and you would come up with the same thing, but now just how we're probing this memory system is leading to different results. I like to show the actual slide from this one, even though it looks a sort of odd dated slide, because again, this is an actual slide from the experiment to give you an idea as to how long we've known about this. This is 1978, Beth Loftus's classic Misinformation Effect. Shows a little vignette depicted out in slides here, a car driving along a road. She seems to have a thing for cars driving along roads in her studies. In any case, comes up to this stop sign, turns right, later on there's a traffic accident, and all right. So in any case, you witness this event in a series of slides, and then you read often a text description of it, as if you've made a statement, then okay, is this your statement? Why, yes, okay, fine, there we go. Except in the written version here, one detail is changed. The stop sign becomes, in this case, a yield sign. Later on, you show people 2 pictures, and you say, which one of these did you see? All right, here's what the data actually looks like. Now, you show people this event, and then in the text description, you either never mention whether it's a stop or yield sign, or you keep it consistently a stop sign. This is this control, no misinformation condition. 3/4 of the time, people accurately pick out, yeah, the stop sign. Take a second, though, and realize that 1 out of every 4 people picks a yield sign even though nobody ever mentioned a yield sign at all. They saw a stop sign, and then they read a text description with stop sign or nothing. They go, yeah, no, it's the yield one. That's already a forgetting problem. Hermann Ebbinghaus, 1885, pretty bad curve there. 1 out of every 4. All right. But if you do have this misinformation, you mention then a yield sign, now almost 60% of the people pick up on the yield side. They're like, yeah, that's the one. It was a yield sign. And then she went on and said, okay, look, you may be thinking to yourself, maybe people, look, this is one of these experimental psychology kinds of tests. It's a tough kind of thing. They're just guessing. They don't know. But she asked people, how do you know? Do you remember this? Do you remember seeing this? Do you remember just reading it? Did you notice there was some conflict? Are you just guessing? People don't think they're guessing. Even though 1 out of 4 of them we know just actually have no memory of the event at the very least. People don't think that they're guessing. People rarely notice that there was a difference. It's about split between people here who say that they saw it, actually saw the picture of the yield sign, or saw it and read it, or that they only read it and assumed it must have been the same. But still, that's saying almost 30% of the people here are picking out the picture saying, no, you showed me that picture right there. That's the one. I remember seeing that. But you don't. Well, you remember it, you just happen to be wrong. Okay, but these are attempts to then go and muck and change with the memory. If you don't try to change it, it'll be all right. Well, no. This is a classic study by Selin and Dooling talking about Carol Harris, and had people read this rather boring paragraph about Carol Harris, saying that she was a problem child from birth, She was wild, stubborn, and violent. By the time Carol turned 8, she was still unmanageable. Parents are very concerned about her mental health. There was no good institution. Her parents finally decided to take some action. They hired a private teacher for Carol. Yada, yada, kind of would have read this, give it a good title in a second grade class or something like this. All right, we test your memory on it, though, and we say, okay, look, did we tell you that her parents were very concerned about her mental health? And you should say, yes, yes, you did. Did we tell you that she was deaf, mute, and blind? She'd be like, well, no. All right. Here's the interesting part of the experiment, though. Half the people read about Carol Harris, half of the people read about Helen Keller. Oh, okay. Now then, when we take a look at the data here, well, if people read about Carol Harris, still 5% of the people said, yeah, you told me she was deaf, mute, and blind. What's up with these people? I don't know, but they are in your jury pool. More to the point, though, if they had read about Helen Keller, fully half of the people say, well, yeah, you told me she was deaf, mute, and blind. But again, this is then your prior expectations, beliefs, biases, experiences filling in for what you think should have happened here, because no, we didn't tell you anything about that. But what else do you know about Helen Keller? That's about the extent of my knowledge of Helen Keller, so of course it would be on there. So prior knowledge influences what you remember. Okay, but these again, kind of boring. What about something that's heavily emotional? I mean, come on, we're supposed to have this flashbulb memory thing that goes off. You witness some crime, adrenaline goes, gets your basolateral amygdala going, modulates the hippocampus, and gets that memory in. Cool. Okay. Well, yes, it is the case that the basolateral amygdala gets going, and yes, it does modulate the hippocampus, and yes, it does get that memory in better to begin with, but the problem is it still goes through all of the same things that lead to false memories after that. There are lots of studies on this kind of thing. I'm just going to give you one here. This is the work of Morgan, and he's done this several times. He takes people going through, these are soldiers, going through a mock prisoner of war training exercise in which they get classroom instruction, how to deal with being interrogated, and then they get put out on a big long hike, and they're without food for a little bit, and then they get captured, and then they get interrogated. Don't sign me up for this experiment. In any case, it's a very high stress situation. They have somebody right here interrogating, trying to get this information out of them. 30 minutes of this, 2 days later, bring them back, put a series of photos out on a table, and their only job initially, is to say yes or no, is the guy who interrogated them, is his picture here in front of them? All right, that's the data right now. If his face is there, 3/4 of the people say, yeah, he's in there, and then go on to pick somebody. Fine. Again, though, the same number, 1 in 4 say no, he's not there. I mean, this was somebody interrogating them, trying to get information for 30 minutes, right there, and still they're like, no. That's one problem. Problem number 2, though, is the bigger problem, where again, about 60% of the time, people say, yeah, he's there, even though his face isn't in the photo array in front of them. They pick somebody out. They say, yeah, he's in there, and then later on, they'll say, that's the guy. He's not. We know he's not. Well, Morgan knows he's not. They rigged the experiment this way, and yet they pick him out. You would think if this whole emotional sort of thing is going to lay down some memory in which you are going to now have this in some nice, perfect vertical snapshot in your mind, you'd be able to pull that off, but you can't. Okay, so I've shown you a lot of the experimental psychology to really just try to say there is a huge amount of data backing this up, and it's been around for a long time. I'm now going to show you a little bit of the neuroscience on some of these things and try to fold this in to say, you know what? Yeah, this is in all of us. It's in rats, and we know a lot of the underlying neurobiological mechanisms for these kinds of things. So for example here, just showing that these kinds of things happen in rats as well. In terms of these traumatic sort of memories, we can do these things to rats. People don't like it, don't want to sign up for experiments. If I say, I'm going to stick you into a little room here, into a little box, and I'm going to give you a little shock. You don't really like it, so we do it to rats. In any case, you put a rat in a box here, you give a mild electric shock, enough so it's annoying, and then you wait some amount of time, and you can, for example, if you stick them in the same box here, they show a memory for this room, this experimental apparatus they've been in. They have something they call freezing, which basically the rat goes, oh man, this is bad. And they stay still. Because look, they're prey, and so one of the things is you stay still. And so, okay, this is this freezing behavior. We can see it's a very strong memory. About half of them or so have this freezing here, and actually this is, this is a delay, study test delay here, and we can see that it's barely decaying this basic sort of memory on it. So, okay, that's good. They have a good, strong memory of it, and we can really see how specific their memory is by taking another group of rats and putting them in a different box. Well, initially, those other rats don't freeze nearly as much, showing that they have a memory for box A versus box B. The details of this, they have a memory of it when we test them at a day. When you test at 2 weeks or a month or a little longer, however, this gets worse and worse and worse. So the contents of their memory becomes boxes are bad, not this particular box with the blue bottom and the floor that was like this is bad. That's what's happening to their memory over time. And we can start to trace out the circuitry that's actually involved in that kind of thing. Because none of this is abnormal. This is the way that memory works. Bartlett got it right. So I'm a neurobiologist now by training. This is what I do. In fact, I stick people inside of MRI scanners, take thousands of pictures of the brain, and try to figure out how memory works, how it changes with age, and all of this kind of thing. That's actually what I do for a living. But in looking at all of this kind of thing, and looking at all this sort of data, all the way from the behavior through things like brain scans, all the way down to the cellular and molecular mechanisms of how new receptors are being implanted into your neurons to change the strengths of memory, all of this says, you know what? Bartlett got it right. Memory here is there is no mechanism I have ever seen that says that you can actually implant, have something happen to you, and etch some memory into your brain that will not change. And there are dozens of mechanisms here by which these memories can be open to change and to forgetting and to alteration. So we know that learning involves changing the strengths of the connections between neurons, the synapses here. That's how fundamentally we think that memory is going on, changing the way your brain is actually wired. And we know, though, that those same synapses, those same connections are used in multiple different memories. And so as multiple things happen to you, they can overwrite or distort and change a prior memory. It's an interference problem here. And we can see these kinds of mechanisms going on synaptically in long-term potentiation, strengthening and decreasing in long-term depression. We can also see mechanisms by which you need to maintain and hold on to this. And we can go and muck with memories and go and actually erase them. I'm going to show you one of those in just a minute here. We can also see that as you retrieve a memory, you put it into a particularly labile or plastic or modifiable kind of state, at which point you can either change and update the contents of memory, or you can even completely erase it. So we see these kinds of things. Let me take you through this, this one very quickly here. This is a work pioneered by Kareem Nader. It's a phenomenon called reconsolidation. And the take-home on this is that, you know what, memory has been designed so that when you have some experience, some event, you learn from it. Great. The next time something kind of similar happens, you may remember that original sort of event. Like, hey, I had been walking through the forest here with my pointed stick, and I had gone into this cave, and there was a big, nasty, tiger or whatever here that almost ate me. It's pretty good then to be able to next time be able to retrieve those memories. That's what memory is for. Your past experiencing making your current day and operation and everything more efficient and better. In any case, once you've done this kind of thing, it's good to be able to now update the contents of the memory. So to be able to add bits in, to be able to change, oh, no, it wasn't this, it was actually this. It's good to be able to do this in our memory system, and this is a nice demonstration of it at a very low level. So what he does is he has animals come on in, and they learn something like a tone is paired with a little bit of a shock. All right. After a day worth of delay here, goes and just presents the tone. Beep. So the idea is that the animal now remembers, oh shoot, wait a minute, I got a shock last time this happened. All right. There's that retrieval of the memory, and then right after the retrieval, he does one of two things. He either injects them with, quote, vehicle, aka the control, aka nothing, or injects them with this thing called anisomycin. Anisomycin, you don't need to remember that it's anisomycin, but the nice thing about anisomycin is it blocks this thing called protein synthesis, and the nice thing about that is it's blocking your ability to actually go and change connection strengths. It's one of the things that we know is involved in learning and memory here. If you want it to last more than a half an hour or so, your neurons are going to need to synthesize new proteins to be able to get new receptors implanted and all this kind of thing to be able to actually strengthen that connection. All right. So the experiment is, remember, you learn that tone goes with a little bit of a shock. I now present the tone, and I inject this thing that prevents you from having new learning. Okay, I mean, whatever. That doesn't seem necessarily, because you already know that the tone goes to the shock, right? So what's the big deal now? Well, the big deal now is if I do that here, oh, sorry, these labels here got flipped. I just had to add them right before the talk because PowerPoint somehow made them disappear. These are flipped. In the anisomycin case here, we do the little injection, so you remember, oh yeah, tone, that was bad. Now I give the injection here, and I test you a few hours later, there's no big effect, but I test you a day or so later, and we've in fact actually erased the memory. So retrieving a memory puts it into this plastic or labile state, gets it into a state in which it needs to be reconsolidated, put back into your memory. If you are thinking of something right now, and I see there's a thought going through your head right now, if I were to inject anisomycin or actually give you ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, right now, I would actually be able to take out those memories that you're thinking about. Yeah, we have all sorts of freaky mad science stuff that we can do by the time it gets into the lab that we don't do in people. But the point is just then that this is what the neuroscience is actually telling us. Okay, last little bit on the neuroscience here. This is one of my things doing fMRI. Right now, if I had you all inside one of these MRI machines, I could actually probably have a reasonable prediction as to whether you are currently actually successfully encoding the stuff I'm telling you so that you'll remember it in a few hours, or whether it's just going vroom and leaving your brain. And I could tell that by looking in places like the hippocampus, this structure I know and love and study a whole heck of a lot. If you have a lot of activity in the hippocampus right now, you are probably storing some of these details of the talk. It's showing it's correlated with your successful encoding of this information or storing it away. So in this misinformation paradigm, it's like that stop and yield sign thing. If right now I'm showing you the stop sign and you have a lot of good activity in your hippocampus, you're actually encoding the stop sign. And so when later on I ask you, what did you see? You're going to say, well, it was a stop sign, and you're accurate. That's what this is showing here. So if you're going to have a true memory and remember the stop sign, when the stop sign is present in the original phase, you have a nice, good amount of activity here. When the misinformation is being present and I'm showing you a yield sign, you don't have so much activity if you are later going to remember the stop sign. If, however, you are later going to remember the yield sign, well, you happen to not have a lot in the hippocampus when the stop sign was up, but you had a whole bunch when the yield sign was up. So what this is saying is whichever phase has the nice, good amount of activity, that's the one you're going to remember the detail from. And that when you're doing this memory task, what you're doing is you're grabbing the few little details you got from either one of those two times you saw it, and you're tying it together into a coherent story. Yeah, a car drove along the road, turned right at the sign. And that blank gets filled in by whichever detail you happen to have recorded, which again is exactly what Bartlett said in 1932. You get a few details in image or language form, and the rest is just reconstructing this story. And this is showing here that, yeah, you know what, that's what's going on. So again, it's like this case here of you see somebody, robbing a store, and I ask you, what did you see? Your memory is going to be tied in a huge part by your prior experiences, expectations, and biases from your entire lifetime worth of experiences here. So when I show you this picture and I say, okay, what is it saying? Well, you're probably going to say that there's some guy robbing a liquor store. But where in this are you saying that it's a guy? You can't see the face. I don't know, maybe you're looking, saying, is that the rear of a man, or I don't know, but there isn't a huge amount of information in here to give any kind of conclusive thing, and yet your account to the police was, yeah, this guy robbed a liquor store. So as we, though, remember these things, I mean, we all know the classic sort of fish trope here of this is the story that you tell people. Yeah, this is the one that I caught. And so you tell this, and you may be saying, it's like, okay, look, I know, though, when I tell the story, that that's not what's actually happened. It wasn't that big. But the problem is, each time you remember the information, any distortions you have, every time you tell it like this, your memory here has a chance to get that fish to be a little bit bigger. This is actually what you caught. And yet now your memory of it is no longer going to be this, it's going to be somewhere here in between. Okay, so to recap, I want to try to make sure we leave at least a few minutes for a discussion here as well. We not only forget, but we generalize, and we believe things happen that are similar to things that actually happen. Any misleading information presented after the fact, leading questions, something your buddy says, or something you think about here, will now get incorporated into your memory, and you have absolutely no way of telling. None. These distortions, as I mentioned, happen automatically. We, of course, talk about eyewitness testimony. They are not immune to this, but jurors aren't as well. They are undergoing a huge memory task. And we're expecting them to remember the exact details. No, wait a minute, was it the prosecutor who mentioned the gun, or was it actually coming from the witness who mentioned the gun? Oh, those sorts of details are easily going to get lost. But this isn't abnormal. This is how our system biologically is engineered. This is how evolution drove this system to happen, because our memory system wasn't evolved to be able to deal with our court system. That's not what it's there for. It's there to get us through life and to be adaptive. All right, I'm in about 2 minutes going to hit about what we can actually do on this. First off, we're not going to change this notion that memory is imperfect. There's no drug I can give you, no hypnosis, no nothing that's going to recover these things, because the neurobiology says they're not even in the brain to begin with. They've been overwritten, they've been changed, they've been altered, it's too late. But if we're trying to acquire the best information from people, we can have police actually have strategies, and this was one of the things that's gone on here in New Jersey in the Henderson case, to try to actually get the best information possible. And we can also try to change how much weight is placed on the evidence drawn from memory. And this is what I hit in the very beginning, this huge disconnect between how I think memory works and how your typical juror thinks memory works. So in terms of some concrete steps, this is this notion of trying to get the information as soon as possible, open-ended, unbiased interviews. There's this thing called the cognitive interview, and a number of jurisdictions are looking at this or at variants on this. New Jersey is one, Massachusetts has some work, Texas has some work, North Carolina has some work, to try to change the way in which police are collecting evidence from the witnesses. And there are huge things in terms of just trying to have open-ended narratives. Say, what did you see? And now, as the interviewing officer, my job is to shut up and let the person talk and realize it's going to take a little while as they try to think and they try to reconstruct. And these will help. They're not going to be perfect, but at least it will help and help keep biases out of there. So don't do things like say, did you see the gun? If you want to say, did you see a gun afterwards with follow-up probing questions, okay. But if you notice the gun is implying that one existed here. But then the other thing is to try to stop treating eyewitness testimony like DNA. That court case I mentioned here is one clear example in which the jurors are not only treating it like DNA, they're saying that it could actually trump DNA. It is going to be missing information, it'll have distortion, so you need to try to corroborate it with other evidence. Okay, so try to leave at least 5 minutes here to keep us open for discussions. Let me just hit, remember, here's that quote from Frederick Bartlett. You've got in your materials also a huge article that that Joyce Lacey and I wrote on this. And with that, I'll thank you very much.